Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the library tour of Doom, where I go through my books, one book at a time, day after day after day. And it turns out I can do a library tour of Doom anywhere, even when the books aren't my own. There's such an enormous overlap between the stuff that I've read and the stuff that's on the shelves here. For those of you who are new and maybe not keeping up with your daily regimen, I am currently vacationing up in small town Vermont, at the house of Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads. If I remember, and I never do, I'll leave a link to his channel down below, but the place is full of books. So the library tour of Doom need not slow down at all. And today, we got a big, fat historical novel, The Kindly Ones, by Jonathan Littel. This was originally written in French. We'll get to that. Came out in 2000, and what did I just say? 2006 in France. And then came out in, and then came out in 2009 in English, translated by Charlotte Mandel. It's a 1,000-page historical novel about sort of the imagined autobiography, memoirs of a Nazi SS guard, a horrible, cramped, bitter Nazi SS guard. And it won all sorts of critical notice in France. It won all sorts of critical notice when it came out in English language in America. And the French critical notice was ecstatic. The American critical notice, not quite so much. And that's because this takes you directly inside the thoughts and attitudes of somebody who thinks that mass murder and genocide are okay. It's somebody who's perfectly on board with them and who has a whole bunch of other more personal and more kinky pathologies that just goes on for hundreds and hundreds of pages. There are large chunks of this book that are brilliant. There are large chunks of this book that are hugely impressive feats of fiction writing. For an author who was comparatively very young when he wrote this book, and I don't think he'd only written one other book before this, a very slim thing of science fiction, not at all like this. This was a major undertaking. It's mighty impressive. There are long stretches of this that are mighty impressive. And if you hear a but coming, you are correct. But there are large chunks of this book that are awful, just awful. There are large chunks of it that are shot through with all of the faults of what I believe this actually was, or at least those chunks, which is debut fiction. There are huge, huge stretches of this that are not reined in at all, that have no editorial control exercised over them whatsoever on the author's part or any editor's part, it looked to me. I have no idea what the French process was. And and that is a drawback. And that's the only drawback that should concern us, right? Because we don't care about the author. Somebody must be here if the bean is going off like a bottle rocket. We want to separate the author from the book. In this case, that's a really good idea because this author, he's the son of Robert Littel, who did an equally big book called The Company about the CIA that was really, really good. Penguin brought it out as a trade paperback. Not sure if it's here. If it is, we'll get to it. But The Company by Robert Littel was propulsive, it was intelligent, it respected your intelligence, and it was not... My little bean! You never hear her make that noise, usually. It was not... The Company was not at all pretentious. This is an extremely pretentious book for a large part of its length. And the reason for that is because of the author. That's why we're going to have to separate the author from the book. You say, well, this was published in 2006 in France, won all sorts of French literary acclaim, was translated into English, but the author could have written this in English. The author is one of those extremely poncy international brats who could easily... He wrote this in French as a gesture, I believe, more than anything. It certainly isn't... He certainly didn't write a 1,000-page book in French because he thinks and composes in French. Just... when I roll out of bed, that's just the way I am. He could easily have written this in English, and he didn't. It is a tooth-grindingly pretentious thing that I am showing you this book by this author and naming the English language translator. And knowing that about this author just I read the book when it came out. I wanted to grapple with it in fiction. I watched all of my critical peers grapple with it in one way or another. When a thing like this comes out, you pretty much have to. But the whole time that I was reading it and the whole time that I was watching that grappling, I was thinking, unless you drastically change your fictional register, I'd be okay never hearing from you again. And I don't like to think that about an author at all. And it was fun to watch the change in tone. French critics largely loved this book. American critics largely didn't. The baby's going crazy. Go up there and sit down, baby. One American critic, I can't remember who it was, I think it might have been Ruth Franklin, just went on and on about how revolting the book is. It is revolting. The character meets every single evil, high-grade Nazi that there is, engages or witnesses every single personal or genocidal atrocity that you could possibly imagine. They're gone into in great detail. One critic in America, I think it was Lev Grossman. It's the kind of a thing Lev Grossman would point out. But I don't know if it was him. But one critic in America said the author drastically overestimates how interesting a normal person would find any of this. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. So for your library tour of Doom, we're decidedly mixed here. If we leave out an author that I think I would want to pitch headfirst down a well, leave him out completely, because that isn't supposed to matter. And we just talk about the book. I'm not 100% sure that you, as a general interested reader, are going to find the great parts of this book. And there are great parts of this book. I don't know that you're going to find them at all close to being compensation for what the rest of the book puts you through. So when it comes to recommend, it's certainly an coherently intelligent book from beginning to end. This is a very smart writer. But, and if you think you can do it, if you think you can do that sort of thing where you wanted to just, what's an example? I'm trying to think of some comparison to make so that you would know. But all the other examples are every bit as equivocal. So, like for instance, I hesitate to mention it, I am not in any way equating the literary genius of these two people, okay? For instance, The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn is a brilliant work, and it is relentless. It is absolutely remorseless. It will put you through a meat grinder. It's a lot greater than this book, but nevertheless, the kind of mental experience is the same, where you're just going to have to decide by the page, I think by page 100 of this book, you will certainly know. By page 100, you have got your first 4-page paragraph taking you through something horrible. Is Dr. Mengele joining two twins with a living tube? Or are we going into the extremely detailed mechanics of how Zyklon B actually kills someone in a closed space? Something like that. When you realize at page 100 or 200 that you're getting 10-page digressions along those lines, then it'll be up to you to decide whether or not this is worth it, especially considering that neither the main character, the SS figure, nor anyone else in the book, I can only think of one possible example, but other in 1,000 pages, are anywhere near likable. Not that you have to like your characters, but they're all awful. Absolutely. They are, in fact, quantitatively the worst people who've ever lived, and they fill every page of this book. So it was interesting to find it on the shelf here, and yet I don't think I would ever be tempted to reread this. I think once was enough. I believe this had a paperback edition that didn't look anything like this. This is the title is another Ponzi bit of pretension, and it also another Ponzi bit of pretension that goes astray. The kindly ones referred to in the title, those of you who know your Aeschylus, the Furies in the Oresteia, when they change, when at the end of the play they acknowledge law, they acknowledge compassion, and they change their nature from being bloodthirsty creatures who are just activated if you commit some sort of unforgivable blood crime to being different. So they go from being the Furies to being the kindly ones, the Eumenides, and that is the reference here. But if you slog all your way through this book and you get to the end and you can figure out why, there is a digression, a 10-page digression on this at around the page, I think 600 or 700 mark. It didn't make any sense to me. I don't think the title of this thing makes any sense at all. I don't know one way or another, but I believe the paperback in America doesn't look anything like this. So if this video has somehow made you interested in this thing, then you know the paperback at a used bookstore is probably going to be what you find. I have never seen this hardcover used at all. I'm assuming that it was mostly bought by critics who are notoriously reluctant to give up their books until they die, and then the Brattle Bookshop finds them, but otherwise no. Or the author's fellow Ponzi writers who are probably equally reluctant to give it up. I was amazed to find it on the shelf here. I don't think I've ever seen a paperback at a used bookstore, but if you do, you don't know what to expect. It is technically a World War II historical fiction. It is technically that. But as far as I'm concerned, as lowbrow as it might sound to you, if you have only one choice, let's say in your reading life for the rest of 2021, you're only going to devote, what would it be, a month, 2 months, to a 1,000-page work of World War II historical fiction? If you have a choice between this, which you're never going to see in your used bookstore, and The Winds of War by Herman Wouk, take The Winds of War. You're really going to love it. And maybe we'll get to it, but not today. The Library Tour of Doom is over for today. This horrible, unanesthetized tooth operation of a book. And some interesting points to it, but if you want to give this family money, find The Company by this guy's father and read that instead. You'll really like it. But anyway, that's the Library Tour of Doom for today. I'm going to go see what my baby was screaming at. There's been a lot of screaming. Any unauthorized movement will do it. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.